for Karen and I, we've enjoyed these conversations because it's given us a chance to get to know people more intimately and to hear your stories. Because ultimately, that's what we want to promote, is the sharing of experiences. All of us have different experiences. Some of us are, several of us are in different countries, so that creates unique experiences, as well as the way we may have grown up. Certainly in the world, the racial tensions that are there around, not only Black, white, Hispanics, Blacks, Asians, whites. There's, wherever you go in the world, there's tribalism, and there's people that are pushing others away because they don't fit their tribe. And so one of the things we hope to do through these calls is to allow people to share their experiences so we can embrace one another, that we can expand our awareness, our tribes, the people that we're close to, and the impact that they can have on us as an individual. I know I've benefited a great deal from hearing from Karen, from Rob Howes, in terms of their experiences in America, which are completely different from my experiences as a white person in America. And oftentimes I'm just in shock and awe. It's like, I never experienced any of that. And so to hear of others' experiences certainly opens my eyes, and I appreciate that. And I thank you all for that. So with that, is there anything on somebody's heart that they would like to share about, what's happening in their world, ideas or suggestions they would like to present to say, hey, maybe we can do things better as a people, as a group?
Well, what just came to my mind when you mentioned about the differences, the differences in skin color and all that, and that you had never experienced anything as such, and you were so enlightened and kind of aware of the experiences that others were having. What came to my mind then was, when I was in Ghana growing up, I didn't know what racism was. I never experienced that. I grew up in an environment where we're all kind of mixed, right? Ghana is very, very used to the different colors and cultures coming in, right? So I never experienced that. But it was only when I went to Poland that I kind of had that first-hand experience of what that actually feels like. So it was just a thought that I never really knew what that meant as well, relating to what you said. So it was also an eye-opener when I moved to Poland to go to university there, when I was maybe 19 years old. Yes.
Yeah, Veronica, I can definitely relate to what you just shared. I don't know, one of the other calls that we were on, I think Steve and Karen, you were on that as well. I may have shared, when I was a little girl growing up, I didn't know that I was a different color per se.
Yeah.
Obviously we can all look at our exterior and see the different shades, but I predominantly grew up in an all Caucasian or an all white environment. And so I was probably 5 or 6 the first time somebody called me Black. And I remember being so upset about it that I ran back to my house and I got a box of crayons. And I brought back 2 crayons, a brown one and a black one. And I stood there and I was like, I'm not Black. This is what Black looks like. I'm brown. And at that age, I was sitting here thinking, I don't even know who this person thinks they are. I could call them white, but then I remember looking at my white crayon and thinking, they're not really white. They're actually tan. So I should bring a tan crayon to them. So it's very surreal at times when you are having a conversation with a person that maybe does not understand the perspective that you're bringing to the table. And I think that can be challenging for people when they're trying to come together as a cohesive unit, but there's maybe unspoken dissension in the mix because you're bringing a cultural experience that the others in the group, in the room, aren't even familiar of until you start saying something, and then they look at you in awe and they're like, wow, I didn't even know.
Yeah.
Which leads me to a question that I was thinking about yesterday that I actually want to throw out to the group. In terms of professionalism in the workplace, what role do you guys feel that leadership has in establishing maintaining either a benign neglect level of racism, or addressing it when it first comes to their attention? What has been your experience, and what's a positive way for leaders to address that? Because it's definitely part of the problem here in America, the systemic racism that's been allowed to just be in operation when people speak up, but nothing happens. And I don't know how that works around the world. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that.
I can speak from the Canadian perspective, especially Toronto. Toronto is one of the most multicultural cities on the planet. I've had the benefit of growing up in that. So for me, there's people are people. I've known people of different shades, like since I was a little boy. And for me, that's just the way I grew up. Now, it doesn't mean because I'm Canadian and I'm in Toronto that racism doesn't exist here. Sadly, it exists everywhere. It's as they say, quieter and more polite here, but it still does exist. And I think all the attention that's been brought forward in recent months is certainly going to help everyone. But as a business leader, or just as a citizen, we just need to step up and speak up when we see something that goes against what should be. And if someone is being oppressed because of the way they look, the way they, like for any reason, people need to start speaking up instead of just turning the other way. And in business, I really believe that when it is seen now, it's going to be called out far more readily. And I see a new way of growing our planet forward. And I believe that collaborative leadership is going to be really the leadership that shifts everything. And through collaboration, well, that's bringing the collective into the decision process, right? Allowing even the people that work within your organization that never thought they had a voice, realize they actually do. And they have value. And I really believe that that's going to be the catalyst for things moving forward. I mean, prior to the last, I'd say 2 years ago, we never heard the word love and business in the same sentence. They didn't exist. Yet today, especially in the last 2 months, we're hearing so much more talk about the importance of love. And I discovered several years ago when I recognized I wasn't a very happy looking person, I was happy inside, that the moment I started smiling, and it at first it was purposeful, what came back to me was priceless. And I've come to realize that if we just learn to love the world will love us back. There's a lot more good out there than bad. And if the good keeps gaining strength, the bad gets weaker and diminishes.
Well, Edward, you give me hope for a guy who has a hard time smiling.
I also think, like, I like what you're saying, Edward, about, the collaborative, environment and things like that. And I think, when you work in corporate America, they have the employee handbook, and you have to take all these like sexual harassment courses and like all of those type of, right? I mean, I don't know, when Edward was talking, that's literally what just came to my mind. But like, why is there not like, or these in the employee handbook, we have to take a racism course, this is what to say, what not, that kind of a thing. I mean, I'm, talking off the cuff here, but have something like that, the same way you shouldn't be sexual harassed in the workplace kind of a thing. and, you know, make people understand the way they speak sometimes may not be appropriate, the same way, you know, a sexual harassment can come up, because then they know ahead of time, you know what I'm saying? And they can kind of heat it at the pass, if you will. And you're absolutely right, Edward. I remember when Lila had, like, and I've talked about this before, when Lila had the sergeant on from the police force from LA, and she was during the Rodney King riots, and she talked about the fact that, you know, people try to say this isn't what it should be, or try to say, you know, we need to change things, and people didn't listen. And I think, to your point, Edward, people now are going to actually listen, because it's so much in the forefront that people aren't going to be afraid to buck the trends, if you will, and turn around and say, you know what, this isn't right. We need to fix this, because this is ridiculous already.
And I think we're also dealing with a current generation. I think,
Yeah.
Especially with what we're going through now, we're going to create a new generation that doesn't even need such handbooks in the corporate world, that they won't need to be taught about sexual harassment, because it's not going to be, my hope is by the time, you know, our young children grow up, that racism, sexual harassment, you know, all of these interpersonal challenges that they have to make these massive books in corporate America to make sure everyone is, you know, following. I think that that's going to diminish in time. I'm hopeful that we start bringing up the children of today to be far better adults than we're surrounded by.
Yeah, because ultimately racism is not something we were born with, yes? So it's a natural state of being. Kindness is a natural state of being. You know, love is a natural state of being. That's the natural state of who we truly are. So ultimately that's a natural expression of us. So that should be the case, absolutely.
I'm curious to know how does this all relate to personal accountability? Because, you know, Kenyatta, I saw your post the other day from Monday where you were talking about the quarantine. And yeah, my family and I have actually been forced to do our own 14-day quarantine period twice now, because we hardly ever go out of the house, but 2 times we've been around apparently some people that were positive for the virus. And so I was thinking about this yesterday. What role does personal responsibility and accountability play, not only in the way that we handle ourselves with respect to the pandemic, but also with racism? What role does personal responsibility play in all of this?
Hey, can you guys hear me at all?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. I want to make sure that my things. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
And thanks for inviting me, Karen and Stephen, for sure. I want to back up a couple things. I want to back up to the corporate question, and then something that Edward had just said as well. In the corporation, it's interesting. When you asked about leadership, like in their responsibility to either put things in place and then enforce them. So I have an experience that I'll share. It was many, many years ago where I worked for a company, and someone came to me and told me that a woman had made a statement about me to several other people, that the only reason I was able to get something was because I was Black. That's why I'd gotten like first in line for something stupid. It was just really weird. But it was such a strange statement. So they came to me and told me how uncomfortable it made them feel that she had said this and how wrong they thought it was. And before I had even gotten to the point where I had went and told my superiors about the particular statement and how I felt about it, other people had already gone and said something. And this person was in a very high level position, but they were gone that night. They never came back to work the next day. And so, you know, it's very interesting because that was quite shocking to me, actually, that the situation was handled in such a way as that. And there could have been other things going on around that I don't know. But after a few people came and talked to me about how I felt about the situation, because that person was my superior. I mean, they didn't come back to work the next day. It was handled, you know, whatever that was, which was quite, like I said, it was still kind of surprising to me. But then also my other thought about it was, well, if there truly is, you know, a zero tolerance policy for things like that, then that's how you handle it. You know, if that's the case. I don't know all the different sides, but I know that that was just a moment, and that was a very long time ago, where it just, what it did is it was just that stark reminder that I think everybody needs, which is that not everybody feels like everybody feels. I think we can be too, sometimes in a situation where we just broad stroke things, where we say, okay, well, everybody feels this way, or everyone should react this way, or, you know, and it's not the way the world is. And so I think as I've grown up and had many experiences with all different kinds of people that were fantastic and amazing, regardless of anything, because I just grew up in a very relatively diverse area. I just think we just need to have to be careful about just broad stroking and saying that all people feel the same way. Because I hear, not in this call, but I hear a lot of that. I hear it from both sides, all sides. Yeah. And I think we just have to be cautious about that, because it's what Karen just mentioned about the personal responsibility. The people in my company that handled that situation the way they did, those were their own personal choices that allowed that to happen about it. Because think about if their personal opinions had been different. If their personal opinions had been, well, I agree what she said about Kenyatta, or I agree that, you know, well, that's not a big deal. But we can say whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was a personal situation. And so you can't broad stroke, right? Because the person, how they innately feel about that situation is how ultimately they're going to respond, unless there's someone, you know, bigger and more powerful than them standing above them with a thumb on them saying, no, you have to handle it this way, because this is what our policy says, this is what our book says, this is what, you know, we don't want this coming down on our heads later, blah, 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 right? So, even still, that person has to stand up against that to go, nope, that's not right. We need to handle this, and put themselves at risk, because they have to have the strong conviction to stand on it and go, no, I'm not following that. There's many times in my jobs over years where people have asked me to do certain things, like, and I worked at school, so that was my background, but plenty of times where I had a boss or just someone who's just like, well, I think we should do this. And I'm like, no, that's dumb. No, we're not doing that. And they're like, no, we're going to do that. And I'm like, well, is that in the best interest of our students? Well, it could be. No, it's not. So I'm not doing it. Right. So now, granted, could have been, and probably should have been fired many times for insubordination, because I stand on my ground. But that's a personal choice though, right? How many times do people just buckle in and go along with the herd, or just go along because of all the different things? People just don't speak their minds. But so I wanted to share that story, and then just talk about how it kind of ties into the personal responsibility that you mentioned, Karen, and people making a choice on their own, regardless of what everyone else is doing or saying, which is very difficult to do, mainly because of fear of criticism. And then to speak to what, Edward, you mentioned about the generational thing. That's very interesting. And I was thinking about it, actually have a conversation with a few people the other day about how generationally we are taught things, kind of like what Veronica said. You know, we don't have an innate desire to, you know, segregate ourselves and have these feelings. We're born with, you know, a sense of calm, quite honestly, and acceptance of everything. But right away in the crib, we start getting taught things, and we start hearing things, and we start listening to our parents. That's our parents who are the people who are around us first. So sometimes the question is, you know, what are they teaching? You know, because again, just as much as I grew up in an environment where it was told to me, well, Kenyatta, you are different. There are some things you need to be aware of. There are some things you need to be concerned about. You know, I know how to narrate what's happening in a situation when I get pulled over. That's very natural to me. Very, very natural to me. I knew that from a very young age, relatively. It's like, police officer pulls you over or whatever. Here's what you do. You know, my hands are right here, officer. I'm going to reach over and grab my wallet out of my purse. Is that okay? That's normal, you know, but that was something someone had to teach me. I wouldn't have necessarily thought that it was that serious of a situation, but I had to learn that from other people who felt it was important that I knew that. So that was a learned thing, not because I had done anything wrong, but it was a learned thing. So that's one component of it. But then also on the other side of it, I also had a mother who taught me, Kenyatta, you can be and will be whatever it is you choose to be. I had a mother who had plaques and affirmations all over the house that said, you know, attitude is everything. You know, I had mother who read good books like The Four Agreements and imparted those things on me as a child, saying, you are a queen. You will be whatever it is. You come from kings and queens. This is who you are. Now, there's going to come some adversity with that. You have much responsibility with that, but you have power with that. So that's how I was raised as well. So again, the messages that we tell our children, I think, are so important, because I know that generationally there are families out there who are teaching their children to hate.
Yes.
Right now, as we sit, there's someone with a child in their lap teaching them these principles because that's their value system. And there's also a child sitting on someone's lap who's getting taught love. So the personal responsibility, I think, comes from the person themselves. It's not a broad stroke. It's who they are within, the self-awareness they have, because the more self-aware you are, the less you hate others, because you realize we're all the same. Yes. With very unique differences. Yeah. But if you don't have that within yourself, then, oh my God, it's so much fun to blame others for everything, right?
Yes.
It's so much fun to say, this is why this thing happened to me. So you have to take ownership. And as soon as you give someone else the power to say, well, you can't do this, your people can't do this, your neighborhood, the people in your neighborhood can't do this. As soon as you believe it, well, it's a wrap, you know? And so, I don't know, that's a lot in all one thing, but it was just kind of where my mind was at with some things. So
absolutely. And just commenting, just to add on to that, really, it all boils down to identifying what your values are. I believe 80% of the population haven't really sat down to identify what their core values are. What are the decisions, or what are my decisions going to be based on? What are my choices are going to be based on what values am I going to bring up my children? On what values am I going to build my business? On what values am I going to treat other people? What are the core values? That really hones the message down. Identify your core values. Is your core value identify? Is that hate? Is that, you know, feeling superior, or feeling, you know, that you are the best and, you know, others are less because they're different? Are those your values? If you can sit down there with a pen and a paper and say, yes, these are my core values and this is the choice I'm going to be making, well then, wow, good luck to you, whoever does that. But when we ultimately sit down to identify how we want to be living and the core values that are going to lead us through life happy and fulfilling, that is such a great thing to identify. I think we need to do that in schools. You know, Kenyatta, you used to be a teacher. Are you a teacher? Because I used to be a teacher too. So it's amazing.
It is,
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That triggers to me a thought that I heard coming out of Russia when they were changing in the late 80s, early 90s. Communism had basically no values. You do what the state tells you to do, and that's your life. And as they started to move into the elements of freedom, they realized people didn't have the kind of values to have a strong community because the state always told them what they had to do. And the school systems, or people in the government, started inviting some Americans to come over and present the 10 Commandments, because they represent some very powerful values of not coveting, of, you know, respect, and all sorts of things that in many ways our school system used to use that as kind of a cornerstone to set values. But we've now, in America, we've thrown that out, and now everybody's value is equal. And so the person with the biggest voice starts becoming the person that everybody gravitates to, and consequently gets influenced by.
I love your point, Veronica, about teaching values in school. I have I have a she's going to be a sophomore actually in September in college, and my son just graduated 8th grade. And I really wish I wish I was taught values when I was, I mean, I was taught love and kindness and everybody, you know what I mean? I wasn't taught like hate or anything like that. But like, what are your values is, I think, so important to who you are as a person. And then you can go out and teach that and show others that kind of a thing. But sadly, in here in America, or Staten Island at least, it's the core curriculum, and this is, they like basically made it much more difficult to get to something. And what they're teaching there's something called resilience. That's one thing, but what they're trying to teach our children, 2 + 2 is 4. But how do you get to that point? You know what I mean? And they're making it over difficult for people, and therefore making people feel less than inadvertently. So it goes to also like inadvertent, things people are saying and people are doing and personal, and it's just all about, it's not about the kids, to your point, Kenyatta. It's not about, it's apparently it's never about the kids. So I think then it becomes up to the parents and other community, other people around us to help sort of buck the trend and say, you know what, no, I know this is what they're teaching you in school. I get that, but this is the way it should be, and this is what you should be learning as well. So if it's not taught in school, which it really should be, that'd be awesome. Yeah. It's up to us, but it's also up to the people around us too. Like, we have to surround ourselves with people as much as we possibly can, family included or excluded, that are going to have the same core values that we do. And even if they don't have some of them, well, that's great, because you can appreciate the differences, but not impart like the bad onto us. And if they do, then have the conversation about it. I always talk about having conversation and having the respect, because even, I think, Karen, what you were talking about before, the thing is, about personal responsibility, you also have to, and even taking ownership, it's also about, not making something into something that it isn't. I mean, I posted the other day about how the original cast of Rent was going to be on something. And it happened to be that they were going to be on a Democratic convention, like virtual Democratic convention. And it legitimately turned into a political post. And I'm like, I'm so excited that these people are going to be on freaking TV. I was all about them singing Seasons of Love, which is like it's my favorite play and my favorite song. And I actually called out the people. They're friends of mine. And I'm like, you know what? No. And now I'm rethinking, do I really even want to be friends with these people? Oh. Because if you can't just, hey, my God, people are going to be from broadband on virtual and make it political. That's part of the problem too, is that people are making something into what it isn't.
Yeah, there's lots of misunderstanding, and one word means something for somebody else,
exactly.
And that same word means something else for somebody else. That's why language and communication is such a very sensitive and very intricate thing to master.
This kind of ties a little bit into some of the conversations Brian and I have had recently. Brian, I am curious to know your thoughts, because you are an intentional encourager. I don't know if Brian can hear us.
Nope.
We lost.
He's gone.
Okay.
That was too much. That was too much, Karen. That question was too deep.
I'd like to hear from you and Salma. What are your thoughts on what we've been talking about so far?
So coming from Egypt, where almost we look the same, but our shades maybe are different, but we are all Egyptians mainly. The differentiation between people happens on different grounds. So, for example, you can see differentiation on basis of age, of religion, of social status, of background, which university have you been to, your political views, your opinions in general in life and in the workplace as well. So, growing in this society where we have mainly the differentiation between religions. That would be, we have 2 official ones only. I had the opportunity to be part of a school of the totally opposite religion, and this broadened my horizons a lot and taught me that I need to be receptive to all. I cannot fit in all the things that I said and all the base of differentiation that I said, but I need to be receptive to everyone. And then growing to the workplace and joining the workplace in a multinational company, I have been introduced to a lot of nationalities, a lot of backgrounds and so on. And I found it very easy to fit in. But I found some other people who had the same culture and the same society in Egypt that had this in a different way. They would differentiate on other bases. But going to the point that was raised by the Kenyatta, if the things that are done in the workplaces are very strict, and if they don't allow people to have, bullying, side talks, or whatever of these things, and it's harshly punished, it fixes a lot. And I hope that in our society, in general, now moving to Toronto, Canada, I see that people are more open on these stuff, but I haven't seen yet the different perspective of any other grounds for discrimination or so far. I believe that schools are the best place to have the basics of accepting everyone. You cannot fit everywhere, so be respectful to everyone.
It's a great point, great perspective.
Nice. Let me jump in. So just for everyone to know, I'm from Guatemala, so I bring the Latino side of the story. And it's very different from what we've spoken so far. And let me take it back to original Latino from Guatemala, not the Latino that immigrated into the US. I will get to that. But the original one is, I wanted to tell you that I come from a country where back in 1996, we ended a civil war where indigenous people were fighting against the system. In other words, the government. Imagine that. We're not talking about just being racism about socialist racism. We're talking about government racism, where governments were going into villages and literally causing genocide. So this is the kind of racism I was exposed to when I was younger. And the irony of this whole thing, and I want to everyone, while you listen to what I'm sharing with you, is I believe in my experience, the biggest problem with racism comes from ignorance. Ignorance is the biggest problem, in my opinion, because see, ignorance is strong until the truth lights up in the room from the darkness that has been living. So let me tell you, it's incredible because first of all, like in my country, it's incredible how we were having a civil war against indigenous while I'm indigenous. It's just a matter of percentages. And that's incredible. So I'm thinking, okay, do we even know what we're doing? Do we even know who we're fighting? You know what I mean? And this is the kind of stuff I was exposed to. I immigrated in '86 to the U.S. as my grandmother married an American, so we were allowed to choose to live in Guatemala or in the U.S. I immigrated to California, San Diego. That was my first experience in the U.S. So it was incredible because I went from being a Ladino, is what they call, not Latino, but Ladino, which is a mix of European and indigenous. So when you're a Ladino in my country, it's like being the supposedly the privileged, people. So in other words, I was in my own country where racism was against pure indigenous, and then all of a sudden I went, and so I was like the problem, the oppressor, and all of a sudden I went to the U.S. and he turned and flipped the chart. In other words, and all of a sudden I was not just a minority, but understand that being a minority plus being an immigrant, oh brother, you're talking about even stronger issues. Because not only are you a different race, but you're a different culture. Not only are you a different culture, but you're having to learn a different language. And as you noticed, human beings we for some reason judge education by somebody's ability to speak. Have you noticed that? Even in the professional world? Well, guess what? An immigrant is looked at as a retarded person when they first arrive to a country. Regardless, I mean, my mother had a master's in pedagogy from the best universities in my country. And yet, when she immigrated to the US, she was looked down upon as a very uneducated, retarded woman that couldn't even communicate. So, it comes down to, like I said, going back to ignorance, because if you think about it, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, did the U.S. forget that California was Spanish first, and we spoke Spanish first, and it was Spanish ruled, and it was indigenous ruled first? All of a sudden, the Europeans came and immigrated without papers and illegally without speaking the language. I mean, I'm just being blunt.
Yeah, you are.
I'm just going by history. So I'm thinking, okay, so doesn't this reflect on the ignorance of history? Because if somebody understood, hey, you were the immigrant, not me, I was here first. You know what I mean? You can't tell me I'm a illegal alien. They don't even call us humans. They call us aliens. Imagine that. They use the word alien. In other words, extraterrestrial. All right, not even from this world. So going back to the language we use, right? Going back to the way we teach things. Another thing, in the U.S., I was never a Latino. Latino is becoming a little more popular now with educated people. But if you think about it, the whole time I was in the U.S., if I was in the West, I was Mexican. If I was in New York, when I lived in New York, I was Puerto Rican. If I was in Florida, I was Cuban. So I was never Latino. People don't even understand the difference between nationality and ethnicity. Can you imagine that? So what does that tell you? That tells you ignorance. Ignorance. It goes down to ignorance. The power of ignorance. The power that ignorance has on people's lives, on people's thinking, on people's understanding. And so that's one of the, if you look at my first video that I had on LinkedIn, one of the main things that I wanted to share with the world and to share with the platform was not only communication, because as you understand, communication has a lot to do with the words, the choice of words we have and everything, the way we behave, and also culture. As we were talking about personal our personal responsibility when it comes to this, as opposed to being victimized, as opposed to living the victim life, I decided to be different. I also moved from California. I went to finish my high school in Utah, where it was all dominated by white. I went to a high school where there were 3 people that were not white. We didn't have blacks, we didn't have Asians, we didn't have any Indians, Arabs, nothing. It was just 3 Latinos and all white. And the other 2 Latinos didn't really come to school because they had to work. So in other words, it was just me, myself, and I against everything that was different. And many northern Utah didn't know much about Latinos. So I can tell you that I had a hard time with the opposition. But what did I do? Instead of like looking at myself as a victim, looking at myself as somebody that was going to there was going to be a lot of racism against me, I decided that I was going to share myself. I decided that I was going to make a difference. I decided that I started, and it's a struggle, and it's because every day I had to explain, listen, guys, I'm not Mexican. That's a nationality. You should ask where you're from if you don't know. That way you can be educated. You can be informed, and you don't come across as ignorant. You don't come across as racist, because nothing against Mexicans. I love Mexicans, the food, the music, classical stuff. You know what I mean? It's like all good, but I don't have to be labeled somebody that I'm not. I have, and so I'm thinking that as somebody mentioned earlier, that maybe in the workplace, things should be, taught about different races, different nationalities, because you know what? In the US, I loved it, but in the same way, even though it's a melting pot, I don't believe in such thing as generalizing people either, because you can't be fit in one place. Like, for example, we have multiracial, families where you can't even say you're this or you're that. My sister, she married a Black Dominican. So now my family is part Black. So you know what I'm saying? So it's like, there's so many things that we can do to change things. I also have lived in Italy and in Europe, and it was such a different thing when I noticed the way people treated me. And it wasn't because Italians or Europeans are better than Americans or anything. I don't want to, that's not it. But I did notice that one big many people knew where Guatemala was located, as geographically speaking. So what did that tell me? That doesn't even necessarily tell me that Americans are ignorant either. I'm not trying to say that. All I'm saying is, I think as people, as people, like, for example, that's the reason why I want to share my voice even here on the platform. And that's the reason why I would love to have, some kind of like reach out to the world and represent as a Latino and speak out about my culture. I think as a platform, we have the responsibility to teach people. You know what I mean? Like, for example, if I'm from, Salma, have Egyptian background, she can speak out and teach us, educate us about her culture. When Black people, hey, I hung out with many Blacks, and it was the best time for me. And this is the reason why I love Black people, because I got to know them. I got to hang out with them. I got to know their culture. I actually relate a lot to them because I'm very, energetic, and that's who they are, and that's how they are. And that's when you get to know races and you can get closer to them because you understand them, because you get to know them. It's not because you become that people or that culture or something or sector. It's the fact that you get educated And when we have education, education is powerful. So I think the biggest thing, the biggest responsibility we can take upon ourselves is educating people, speaking out, not being afraid. We need to, we can't be, dominated or intimidated. I'm not saying that we need to be revolutionary and spark up some big revolution, social action or anything like that necessarily. But I think it does start with ourselves. It does start with our home. It does start with our, presence and how we represent ourselves and how we share ourselves with the world. And it is a big responsibility for us to educate and share with the world who we are. That way we can help out the future generations and everybody else around us that, hey, that guy's Latino. He's from Guatemala, but he's Latino. He's been teaching me. He's been talking about it. He's been sharing his culture. He's crazy. He's cool. He's just like us too. He's not that different. He's not just because he's from a different country. He's still human being. And wow, he's relatable. And he can dance. And I dance. Wow, what a cool thing. So this is what I wanted to share with everyone. I think we need to fight ignorance and educate people as much as we can.
Love that.
Dimitri, you said something that really speaks and hits so close to home to me. My children are biracial. Their father is white. And it's very interesting. We have this conversation actually quite frequently. A week ago, my daughters were out. They went to a store to go pick up something, and they were stopped by a person that was like in the kiosk area. And she kept asking them, what country were they from? And she was asking them, first she looked at them and tried to say Spanish. And there's no Spanish in our background. They're, again, white and black. But when people look at them, they get asked all the time, what country are you from? Or they just automatically assume that they are a part of a group that is not even a part of who they are, much like you spoke about people incorrectly assuming that you belong to a certain group based off of you just maybe not even speaking, just showing up. My children, they, obviously they're mixed children, so their skin color is not the same as mine. And yet we do look alike. So it's kind of interesting where I've had people on both sides of the aisle. I've had Black people, mostly the older generation, that have seen my children. And I can remember when my two oldest were like 2 and 3 years old, an older Black woman looked at me and thought I was the nanny. She could not believe that those were my children. And then I've had people tell my kids that I can't be their mother, when I think, what you said about there's something about respecting people and just asking them polite questions that don't really devalue who they are and what they bring to the table. And that goes kind of, it takes me back again, Brian, I wanted to ask you a question earlier. I know you had to step away for a minute, but you and I have had several conversations around this, and you being an intentional encourager and you really understanding the importance of being intentional with the way we show up. I'd love for you to kind of share a little bit about that.
Karen, I appreciate that. I had some poor internet connection, so I had to step out and step back in. I hope everybody's doing okay. I've been listening, and I apologize for being late. I've done 3 hours of live radio this morning. So I got off the air at 9 as you guys were doing that. If you mind, Karen, I want to go in a little different direction because I'm hearing something, and I want to share this with the group this morning.
Yes, go ahead.
I heard Kenyatta talk about her experiences with police. I heard Karen talk about political, taking the rent, her enthusiasm for rent and it becoming something political. I heard Dimitri talk about the confusion around where he's from and things like that. I'm going to share one thing with you this morning that's going to be, I hope it's going to be a V8 moment for you where you do this. People do not crave love. They do not crave money. I'm going to share with you the one thing people crave the most, and that is consistency. Let me expound on that for just a minute. Kenyatta, if the police treated everyone the same, we wouldn't have the issues that you're describing because everyone would be treated the same. There would be no difference made between the police stopping a black woman and a white man like myself. It would all be this. Dimitri, people would not have to wonder what country you came from or this or that or the other if they just treated you the same. Karen, your kids would not have to answer questions about what country they're from if people treated them the same. And Karen, in the middle where I'm seeing you, it wouldn't matter about where the cast of Rent was performing if everybody treated that the same way. And think about it this way. We like certain restaurants that we eat at because we know every time that we go to that restaurant, the food is going to be the same. We can already taste it in our minds. The reason that grandparents and parents pass along recipes from generation to generation is if the recipe is followed, the food is going to taste the same whether Karen makes it or her grandmother makes it. It's all about consistency. People crave consistency. And when we in this country have gotten our most inconsistent is when we have faced the difficulties that we face today. It's because we've allowed the inconsistency of social media where people are not who they represent themselves to be on social media platforms. That's where we have gotten inconsistency in our society. And wherever there's inconsistency, there's problems. Think about products that we buy, that we like. The minute something changes about that product, there's a disconnect. The minute we have think about Apple. Apple's one of the top, probably top 5 Fortune 500 companies in the world. When Apple started having battery issues that they intentionally caused themselves by sacrificing consistency, then they started losing customers. And then Apple had to say, wait a minute, we messed up. We were not consistent with our core values. And now Apple's come back and they've become strong again. You know why Amazon is so successful? Because their customer experience is consistent time and again. You can get anything you want to on Amazon. And they have done extremely well through this pandemic because they've been consistent. People knew that they could go to Amazon and get just about anything they needed, so they did. And Amazon delivers time and time and time and time again. They're so consistent in their delivery. We ordered something from Amazon Monday afternoon. It showed up yesterday, just like they said it would. And so it's not that we crave love. Let me tell you something. If you get consistent, you'll find love. People that have consistent relationships with their families know what love means. People that are good with money consistently don't have money issues. If we would ever get to a place in our society where we became consistent, then you would see a lot of things change. And so, yeah, I've been intentional about encouragement, but I'm trying to be more intentional about consistency.
Yeah.
So the question is, what generates consistency?
Veronica, if I treat you the same, if every interaction that we have, you come away with the same feeling time and again, that's consistency.
Absolutely. How do you plant that into the government? How do you, I totally agree with you, and that's so true. I mean, consistency is a core value of mine, and showing up on LinkedIn for 3 years over now is so important. But how do you instill, is there a way that we can discuss on how to instill this consistency within where there isn't?
Yep.
Why isn't there consistency, which should be the case, must be the case, but there isn't?
Because the thing of it is, people are more concerned about keeping power than they are being consistent.
Absolutely.
So in other words, we're in an election cycle right now, not to get political, but you're hearing a lot of messaging. You're hearing a lot of messaging that says, if you elect me, I'll do this. I am a leader because I say I'm a leader. And then we elect them based on those promises. And when they get in office, they're not consistent with what they said they would do. very easy to develop consistency if you do one thing. If you do what you say you're going to do, time and time again. If you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, that's why salespeople have a negative reputation in some cases. It's because they've made a promise, they've overpromised and underdelivered. And so it's easy when you own what you say and you deliver on what you said you're going to deliver on. That's how you develop consistency. But it's easy for people to say one thing and do something else. It's easier to do that than to actually own what you say and do what you say you're going to do.
Absolutely.
Edward,
Consistent.
I want to jump in. Edward, I've been having fun watching the expression on your face. I would love to hear the thoughts that are rolling around in your face, in your head right now.
Yeah, and then I'd like to add something after Edward.
Well, consistency starts here. There's the issue. And it's funny because I've related consistency to relationships many times. And a very simple thing I've used is if I'm starting to see someone, I open the door for you day one. I'm going to be opening the door for you day 10,001. And that's just a simple thing. Not that the door needs to be opened, but it's a choice I make. Rather than, what will make me look better right now, which is not me, I'll do this. Well, it's been proven that you can play a role for up to 2 years, but eventually, and there's been things written about this, at about that 2-year mark, it starts to break down. And I think if people stopped being so afraid of how they portray themselves and just focused on being better within, that consistency would be so much easier to accommodate. And I love the concept of consistency for everything. I love it, Brian, like that, fantastic. But it starts here. If we can't be consistent with ourselves, then there's no hope. But what gives me hope is conversations like this and what is happening in the world. And I've not seen anything but goodness come from this pandemic that has slammed us, and all the things that have come about, I'm hoping are going to help us all evolve to a better place. And it's evolution that we are all seeking. Evolution towards consistency, evolution towards eradicating racism and bullying. And we're being bombarded now with the education of really being a better person. And the hope is that the ignorance diminishes in time. And I always look forward with hope. My hope is what we've been forced to accommodate currently is going to force an evolution that will hopefully bring us forward to a positive place.
Edward, I love your analogy of the door, because that resonates with me. As a younger man, I was always quick to get the door for others as an act of kindness. And one of the female bosses that I had took offense at that. She thought, I think, that she should be treated specially. And that maybe by opening the door, I was somehow treating her special. And so she told me a couple times, "Stop doing that, Steve." And I remember processing that through me and saying, "Hey, this is who I am. I am not going to stop being who I am." And so I kept getting the door for her. And you know what she did? After that, she would run to get the next door for me. And so, but again, it's back to consistency. You have to know what you are, who you are, and remain consistent to that, despite what the world says to you.
Well, and there's
So-
the rub of
so
it,
ca-
right? We all seek validation and we all want to portray what we feel is going to be best accepted. But when you come to realize the importance of being who you are and embrace and celebrate your uniqueness, as long as what you're coming from within is positive in nature, you'll find yourself around the right people. The right people will come to you. That frequency will be matched.
So I like to throw something in there about what you guys are talking about with consistency, because the whole time we're talking about it, I just kept thinking about that they're like we're almost saying that they're, you know, what we need is consistency, and people need to be consistent, which there, I believe absolutely there's truth in that. I think what comes to mind though, and what we're seeing too, is that people are being consistent. It's the thing that they're choosing to be consistent with that we can look at and judge and say, well, that thing you've been consistently doing is creating a certain situation for a certain person that is leading them to be discriminated against and not being treated fairly. And people are being consistent. It's just what they're choosing to be consistent with that we might say, those of us on this call might go, well, no. We don't want you to know. We want you to stop being consistent in that way. Meaning we want you to change the way you are thinking and feeling and doing and how you run your company and your organizations or your schools or anything like that, regardless of the whether it's black or white or, you know, religion or anything like that, because people are steadfast and consistent in the things that they choose to be, because they have their own system of values and experiences, and people have their core values. But what are those core values that they are standing by just as strong as we're standing by ours? So the idea that communication, and Veronica, you mentioned that, because I think a lot of this has to do with people's challenge to communicate. I teach a course called the Platinum Triangle of Patient Communication. The triangle is listen, ask, and summarize. And we spend most of our time talking about listening and the barriers we have. And one of the deepest ones, and I get in deep conversations with my students at my GED class about this, is prejudging and filtering. That's why we don't listen. One of the main reasons, and I leave this one for last because usually it leaves everyone feeling a certain kind of way when we dig into it, but we talk about all the reasons we prejudge and filter. And it is all the things we've been talking about: color of skin, shade of skin, sexual orientation, religion, politics, who you voted for, who you didn't, whether or not you have tattoos, whether or not you had an abortion, what slab of this planet you were born on, what languages do you speak, you know, were you born in Guatemala or Mexico? Where were you born? You know, the fact that you don't speak English means something to someone. It's, you know, we prejudging and filtering. You could get on the bus and sit next to someone who holds the key to the next job that you want to take or get, but simply because of the way that they're dressed, or you think their pants are hanging too low, or you think they're too buttoned up with their little fancy tie and shirt, whatever it is, you could prejudge instantly and then filter them and then stop listening to what they have to say and share. And that's even from an emotional standpoint or simply hearing standpoint. Listening is healing, it's energy that we put out into the ether and it comes back in. Our receiving stations can pick it up or it could bounce it away. Which is it going to be? But because of that, there are people who are prejudging and filtering the people who are being consistent in what they believe. So to me, that's almost the hardest thing of all of this, is because even like Salma mentioned, you know, the things that she experienced from, you know, they were ways to prejudge and filter. They're like, well, we all look the same, so we can't do that. What else should we judge each other on? Oh, yeah. Where you went to school. Let's say that if you went to that school and you didn't go to this school, well, then now I get to say that I'm better than you in somehow way, or you are less than I. And not only that, I'm going to be so consistent in my values and how I think and feel about that, that I'm going to teach it to my children. Because
But
if
it
I'm going to
is-
stand, if I'm going to stand on it and go, this is the way I feel. And I tell people, and I with intentional encourager, I love that. I tell my students all the time, whatever it is you choose to do, like if you think that just because I look like this, then I deserve less and you deserve more, and you're so committed to that, then you better be intentional about it and teach it to your children. Then if you think that's a good idea, would you teach it to your child?
Because I believe this, and you guys are just seeing me. You don't know my whole story and things like that, but I grew up in a black neighborhood.
Mhm.
In fact, one of the things that we talked about the last 3 days that I've done live radio is my having that V8 moment last summer when riding my bike past a house all of my teenage years and not realizing that that house was instrumental as a stop on the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
And so is it a Pollyannish concept to just treat everybody the same, no matter their race, creed, color, sexual orientation, and just treat people as people? And that's what I'm talking about with consistency is I have had to develop my consistency. Who I was 10 years ago is not who I am today. And who I was 10 years before that was not who I was 10 years prior. Life changes you. Things that you go through change you. And you develop a new consistency. I love what Edward said. If I'm opening the door today, I'm opening the door that way. I love that. Steve, I love I'm glad you stuck to your guns and were who you said you were. And again, I can't get away from it. We have so many people that say things and then they have to walk it back. It's like, oh, I didn't mean to offend. Okay. If you say it, own it. If I say that I'm an intentional encourager, when you talk to me, you better get some encouragement. Otherwise, I'm a fraud.
Right.
And our world is full of frauds today.
Yeah.
We've got so many people that are bad actors on social media and everywhere else because who they really and my dear friend that I fill in for on the radio, he says this all the time. He says, who you are will manifest itself sooner or later.
Absolutely.
Who you really are will manifest itself.
Yeah.
And so is it a naive concept that we just say, okay, if someone is inherently racist, wouldn't you want to know it up front instead of them being a bad actor? I'd want to know up front what I was dealing with. I would want to know up front what I was dealing with and what was inside that person's heart. So then I could make the choice to go, that doesn't align with me from a value standpoint. So I'm going to distance myself from you. It's not that I'm not going to be nice to you and be who I am at my core, but you have a set of values that don't resonate with what I am about. And I just choose to distance myself.
Sure. And I guess I want to answer your initial question, Brian. Yes, I do believe that treating everyone the same is a great answer to what we're dealing with, and being aware of the prejudging and filtering that happens where we don't treat people the same. So I agree with you in that. Like everyone, we're all, I like to say, hanging on to this big old rock spinning around the universe. We don't know what the hell's going on. We don't have any definitive about anything. We're just trying to hang on to this planet spinning around. There's so much similarities in all of us. Why do we have to have the prejudging and filtering, which causes people to treat us differently? But I guess I was just making the point that where I'm consistent in who I am, right? I've always been the person who's always gathering everyone. Come on, everyone, let's go. I'm fascinated by the differences of people to me because I get bored, actually. So I just want to kind of hang out and talk to everybody. You know what I mean? That's what I do. But I consistently do that. So I am consistent in what's true to me. But I guess the thing I was throwing out there and was on my mind about the people who are consistent in being the way they are as well, that doesn't necessarily serve humanity. I guess if you want to put it that way, they're being consistent. They're like, yep, this is what we're going to do. So what are we being consistent about? I guess is what my thought, my process there. I believe in consistency, but what are we being consistent about?
Yeah.
So
that really says that there are different types of consistency, summing
Yes.
it up kind of, and whichever box it is consistent in what it is. And the reason why there are so many different categories in consistency, because there's so many different types of values and priorities and values, because we can have 3 values that are the same, but different priorities, right? And we'll still behave differently and make different choices just because of the priorities that we have set them at. So I guess that's the whole point.
I think one way to kind of bring it, another way to bring this all together is to talk about the element of respect, which several of you have mentioned each time you've spoken. The element of respect for those that are the same, but also respect and appreciate the differences, because that's where we're able to come together and really to marry the diverse cultures and the diverse richnesses that are found within every one of us. It doesn't really matter how we look on the outside. Yes, I truly believe that what's on the inside is going to flow through to the outside. That's what people see. It isn't so much your exterior that people see when you show up. It's really what's on the inside that's emanating out there. And if we could focus and make sure that when we show up, we're just respecting everyone, regardless of what our eyes see, regardless of even what our ears hear, because to me, there's something beautiful about being able to acknowledge that you don't agree with somebody else's ideology, but you still respect them enough to give them the opportunity to share and show who they are. And in that moment, that's when you can say, oh, okay, you know, I don't agree with this person. I don't even like what they stand for. So I'm going to still give them the opportunity to present themselves as they are, but then I'm going to make a mental note that maybe we just don't hang out. But then there's also an opportunity to still also learn from their perspective so that you can find some form of commonality. And I think that is part of the problem, and one of the missing pieces in our culture today, in our society today, is that people are so bent on the fact that there are different people showing up at the table that they don't want to take the time to listen to their perspective, to develop an understanding so that they can find some kind of commonality and then work from that point. That's where we can really make a difference. When we all come back to the table and realize at the core of who we are, there is something that is similar in all of us. And that is that we're all humans. We all breathe. We all bleed the same blood. It may not be the same blood type, but we all bleed when we get cut. There are certain commonalities between all of us, regardless of where we were born, into the family, the country, what our jobs are. It does not matter. There are certain commonalities. And when we can kind of look past and push past the differences enough to focus in on the commonalities, it can kind of temper down our distaste, our own unique biases that we bring from our, you know, our childhood. Because we all have those biases, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And they're all shaped by the different experiences that we've gone through our whole entire life. And every day is a new opportunity for us to say, you know, when you're meeting somebody that maybe doesn't look like you, doesn't sound like you, doesn't believe the way that you do, you have a choice in that moment to say, I'm still going to respect you. I'm going to give you an opportunity to present yourself as you are. And I'll either say, yeah, I agree with you, or I don't, but I still want to come together on some common place. And that's something that I don't think we do enough, whether it's in school or not. And I for sure feel like we need to be teaching the young people about respecting the differences, appreciating the differences, because that's part of what makes life so rich, is the differences. Not that we're all the same. We can't all be the same. That makes my kids call being the same all the time vanilla. They're like, that's bland, that's vanilla, it's not fun. We want to have some spark and some excitement, and that's where the differences come into the picture. Edward.
It's for me, succinctly, it's respect with an openness to learn.
Yeah.
Period. If you have an openness to learn, you will find out what the differences are. You will find out how much more commonality there is as well. It's respect with an openness to learn. It's the people that believe they know it all, that say, this is the way I feel. I'm not going to feel any other way. Don't try to convince me.
And
Convince yourself.
yeah,
have an openness to learn. Respect with an openness to learn is, for me, succinctly what should be pursued.
And know you can still be friends with people even though they have different opinions from yourself. I mean, my best friend and I don't talk about politics because our political views are completely separate. And I flat out said to her, I'm like, and I've been friends with her since 5th grade, so we're going on 40 years. I'm like, we're never going to talk politics again. Doesn't mean I don't love her. Doesn't mean she's not my kid's, aunt or anything like that. We don't agree, so therefore we don't talk about it because it's just, we don't agree about it. So you can not agree with someone and actually still be friends with them and actually still like them too. And I think that's completely lost in our society as well also.
Karen, I love that you said that, because isn't it interesting? That's one facet of your friend.
Yep.
Right? We have so many layers within us, and that one thing you guys both just said, you know what? It's probably not a good topic of conversation, right? and you leave it alone. And because that doesn't define someone, who their whole being is. Exactly. But because of the prejudging and filtering, that one thing, right? Truly, people let that be the one thing that can define them, to completely define them so much to where that person, someone could decide that person should die because of it. Mm-hmm. Some people hang on to those things so tight, where it's one little tiny facet about an idea that someone has that doesn't define their whole being. And to Karen, what you mentioned about the teaching and Edward about the learning, we're a group of friends and I are starting a charter school here in Arizona. It's a behaviorally based charter school, because these concepts that we're even having a conversation on this phone or this call, about social emotional learning and awareness, because that's really what we're talking about here at such a core level. And then the idea that we all do have differences, and we all know that innately everybody wants to fit in. Like, no one wants to be left out, but we all want to be unique. Like, we want to fit in, but we still want to have our uniqueness with us. So what does that really look like? Think about the challenges children have on the field. They're playing out there, and one kid looks different than another kid, and one kid decides to go, well, that kid, her hair is red. Ha ha ha, her hair is red. Kids are mean. They come up with the craziest things, and they don't really understand. But we know that if we can start with them and start now, because we don't know what's going on at home, but our school will bring the parents into our school. Like, the parents don't get to be removed from the concepts that we teach and train and coach to with behavioral superpower. Some of you have mentioned every student will know that what makes them innately different, but then they will also be taught to appreciate the differences of everybody else right out the gate, so that hopefully, theoretically, 20, 30, 40 years, 100 years down the road, these concepts that we are teaching children will make a difference. Because that's, again, like Edward said in the beginning, it's kind of like we got to weed ourselves out, if you will. There's too many of us who are still alive right now who have these values that we all say we don't want anymore in our world, not our United States, but our world. But again, generationally, they're still being taught. So at what point does that change? So we're going to do what we can in our little corner to start something that hopefully can help that.
Hey guys, I have to jump off. My phone's kind of blowing up here, but thank you all, Steve, Karen. Thank you for the invite. It's been a pleasure being a part of this conversation. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with all of you.
Okay.
I look forward.
Thank you, Brian.
I look forward to more conversations in the future. Thank you, guys. Have a great
Thank you.
July weekend.
Thank you, Brian. Bye.